Welcome to The Report with me, Jonathan Steele. On tonight's programme, we're discussing the ongoing migrants crisis across Europe and the Mediterranean. We'll also be looking at the commemorations in Hiroshima, 70 years on from its destruction by an atomic bomb at the end of the Second World War. But first, London is again at a standstill. It's the second rail strike in as many months, second tube strike in as many months, struck the UK's capital city. Members of the RMT and TSSA unions have staged a second walkout over the planned introduction of some 24-hour services at weekends, which is due to be launched on September the 12th. They feel this is an attack on their terms of employment. The government maintains that it has negotiated a fair deal that the unions have simply rejected. Nathaneal Amos-Sansam has this report.
This morning, millions of Londoners struggled into work as strike action by Underground rail staff brought the city to a standstill for the second time since July. Travel chaos was feared across the British capital this morning as commuters turned to cars, bicycles and even boats to make it into the city. While many roads and bicycle lanes have been full to capacity, people have largely dealt with the congestion. Commuters who struggled into the city said they were frustrated with the lack of progress in negotiations to stop the strikes.
It's just been a nightmare. It's been a complete disaster this morning. Got up about half an hour earlier. You can't do anything. It's just carnage. It's like a bomb site's gone off. It's a joke. So TfL sorted out. That's all I can say.
The action follows a long dispute between Transport for London and the main RMT and TSA transport unions over the planned introduction of some 24-hour services at weekends, which are due to be launched on September the 12th. The unions see the terms and increased hours on offer as an assault on their rights at work. The government and Transport for London insist that the deal before them is fair. Commuters felt that there was a lot of conflicting information about the strike action and about the proposed deal.
There seems to be a lot of conflicting information about whether people are being forced to work night shifts, whether they're given much of a choice in the matter. So, for two strikes now, it must be really serious.
Nathaneal Amos-Sansam, The Report.
Well, joining me to discuss today's strike is Murad Qureshi, Labour member of the London Assembly, and George Woods, who's Senior Campaigns Organiser at New Economics Foundation. Welcome you to the programme, both of you. Murad, let me start with you. This is the second strike in 2 months. How's it got to this point?
Well, Londoners are right to feel exacerbated by this, and I get the sense they're losing patience. But quite honestly, I think we've got to point the finger clearly at the Mayor. When he made this announcement of the 24-hour service a few months back, he hadn't consulted with the unions. It's quite rare to have RMT, TSSA and ASLEF together with a huge majority on their ballots. So they're together on this because the Mayor hasn't been prepared to tell them up front what he wanted of them and negotiate. More recently, it's been made quite clear that he's not inclined to sit down with them when even his rival Tory, future Tory candidates for the Assembly are saying they would start the process of talking. And that's what we need. We need some talking to get them.
2 months ago.
Yeah.
Strikes don't seem to be very effective if nothing's changed in the 2 months since then.
But positions haven't changed between management and the unions. That's quite right. But it comes down to essentially making an announcement without actually consulting with the unions about their new terms and conditions. This can only work if you get the workforce behind it, because you're not putting new equipment here, you're extending their terms and conditions into the night shift, and there are some real issues there. Just this week we were told about the harmful effect of night shift working on people who do night shift anyway. That surely should have been sorted well before the announcement was made, and I'm very, very concerned now that it's not going to happen on the 12th of September, and it's likely to be delayed substantially because of the position the Mayor and TfL have taken.
Well, George Woods, do you agree that there should have been better consultation by Boris Johnson with the unions?
Well, I think Murad is absolutely right. to do here is to draw attention to the fact that actually this is an industrial action that's been taking place actually about an element not about pay or holiday, as some newspapers have been reporting, but about the right to a family life. And I think that's a really fascinating development, actually, that, that there's been an extremely solid, from what I can tell, industrial action across London today, basically in right of the employees of London Underground to be treated fairly and to be consulted properly, in face of this proposal, which is about rostering employees to work night shifts compulsorily, whether they want to or not. And I think, Murad draws attention to the recent research out as something we're very concerned about at NEF, is about a workforce that is properly getting its work-life balance correct. The trend has been the wrong way for the past period of time. And I think this industrial action today is a symptom of that, that actually employers such as TfL and London Underground need to work in a spirit of cooperation with their workforces and not try and impose these kind of unsafe changes by diktat.
But the management says that any person has the right to reject night working, that nobody will be forced or compulsorily obliged to work at night if they don't want to.
Yeah, and I think what the unions have said is that the offer fundamentally doesn't change their key concern, that no proper system has been agreed for night shifts, and that staff will be rostered to work all night without consultation, and can then, if they want, there's this talk of an opt-out later on. But I think that's for the unions and TfL to clarify.
Who is actually in charge? Is it TfL taking the decisions, or is Boris Johnson overriding what they're thinking?
That's a very good question, Jonathan, and I think that needs to be put to the Mayor. He's kept his hands out of this and left it to TfL management. But it's quite clear to me that when he made the announcement of the 24-hour tube service for the 12th of September, it was on the back of his support of the Garden Bridge. It came out circumstances that no one was expecting, and I'm not surprised it's got into this kind of mess. And they didn't consult the workforce, because it has huge implications on the way they are expected to work. I unfortunately foresee this to go on beyond the 12th of September. I'm not knocking the idea of a 24-hour service. I think there are merits to it on the London economy, but let's not forget the impact it has on the workforce, who ultimately are going to have to be working those longer shifts and longer hours, or different shifts in different contexts, to make sure the service is operational.
Now, there's been some suggestion that if they manage to get this through, and there'll be night tubes at weekend all through the night, they will cut the number of bus night services. Is there any clarity on whether that's true or not?
We have heard that actually at City Hall, and it's something that the Transport Committee will look into. I think what they're assuming there is that there is going to be a shift of those on night shifts not taking the buses onto the tubes. But I'm not sure how much research has actually been done to do this exercise. There's also going to be an impact on things like the black cab services and what have you. We haven't had this fleshed out really, and I think it's not surprising given the way it was announced in the first place. And I think the Mayor has actually not thought this through as well as he should have done with the management at TfL.
And George Woods, I don't know whether you can throw any light on it, but when the bus night services were introduced, was there consultation over that? How come we didn't have strikes when they started all-night buses?
I'm not sure about the details of that. It's possible Murad could throw some light on that.
Well, it may have been different unions involved. Do you happen to know that, Murad?
I can't recollect actually, but the bus drivers are unionised in a different way from the tube service, and by and large, they took that on board and took the opportunity along with the benefits of overtime. And in the contracts that TfL had. Actually, they're not directly employed by TfL, actually. They're actually employed by the contractors for the bus contracts. So TfL and the Mayor are also one hand removed from directly employing the drivers.
George Woods, I mean, how does this chime in with the government's recently announced new legislation that affect union rights and voting before strikes and all the rest of it? Do you see this as part of a sort of general attack by the Conservatives on unions?
Well, we at the New Economics Foundation would approach the question like this. We're extremely concerned at the rise of growing inequality that's characterized the last few decades. That's accompanied a rise in a lack or a reverse in social mobility. And that actually all of the research that we've been doing points to the fact that a strong and healthy trade union sector is a key part of the mix of the solutions that we need to reverse those negative trends and to try and build a society that's more equal, where current and future generations get the same opportunities to progress and to improve as their parents' generation. Now, what we're concerned about is that any attempts to put obstacles in the way of workers joining with their colleagues and freely organising in the workplace actually is going to be a setback to that, to those efforts to combat inequality, and are going to make things more difficult. So yeah, we see this as part of a worrying time at the moment for the ability to build a more equal, more democratic, and more accountable workplace and the kind of society that we want to see.
I mean, the government says, coming onto the union legislation, says that the idea of not getting rid of checking off from your pay your membership of the union, your subscription to the union, and replacing it with direct debit is progressive and modern and a good idea.
And it's interesting how they've moved tack, actually. I think the original attack was that the ballot thresholds weren't high enough when strikes or industrial action were taken. Well, in this instance, all three unions, RMT, TSSA and ASLEF, have well exceeded 40%, and they've got something like 80-90% of their members actually voting for this action. Now, withdrawing your labour is costly for people. They lose a day's pay out of this, and that's happened twice now. And actually, when we've heard people like the Mayor lecture them about it, we've often had to tell him that he's not had a mandate. He's only had a mandate from 38% of Londoners, and 1 out of 5 Londoners have voted for him. And it's a similar thing nationally, actually. So I'm not surprised they've taken this another course of action, which is to stop the financial contribution from trade union members coming directly into other political parties, and i.e. not going straight from their wages into the unions, and political levies have also been attacked. I think this is a start of further action aimed at the union link with their members, as well as political parties.
And George Woods, just a final question, because we're running out of time. Looking into your crystal ball, do you think this will be resolved, or will there be a third tube strike in a matter of weeks, do you think?
Well, I think there's certainly the need for compromise. I certainly think the onus is on Transport for London and London Underground to actually sit down. I mean, in the way that Murad already explained, I think there needs to be a greater sense of engagement from the very top, politically, with the unions to try and resolve this. I don't think it's tenable for the capital's transport infrastructure to continue to be kind of run in this kind of way. And that really means that, I think that starts with an appreciation and a recognition of the very real concerns about their work-life balance, about their paying conditions that London's transport workers are bringing, as their concerns to the table.
And Murad, your view, do you think there will be a third strike, or do you think there will be a result?
I sincerely hope not, but I'm sure of one thing: a 24-hour service won't be operational on the 12th of September, that's for sure.
Well, on that note, thank you very much, Murad. Thank you, George Woods. That's all we have time for on this topic. We're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we'll be having a roundup of the day's main news headlines and what you've been saying on social media. So see you after the break.